Hey folks, subscribe to our channel and drop your comments below this story. Share what blew your mind about the IS-2 tank, and let us know if you want more epic war tales like this. The captured IS-2 tank, how a Soviet beast stunned the Germans. War is a wild mix of strategy, grit, and jaw-dropping moments that stick with you. One such moment came when a Soviet IS-2 tank, a true monster of World War II, fell into German hands for a brief but unforgettable episode. Picture this: a chaotic battlefield, smoke rising, villages in ruins, and amid it all, a massive Soviet tank sits abandoned. The Germans who found it were thrilled at first, but their excitement didn't last long, and what they learned about the IS-2 left them in awe. Let's dive into what made this tank so shocking and the lessons the Germans took away from their short ride in it. Using the enemy's weapons wasn't unusual back in World War II. Both the Soviet Red Army and the German Wehrmacht loved grabbing whatever tanks, guns, or vehicles they could get their hands on, especially if they still worked. Both sides had repair shops dedicated to fixing up these captured prizes, patching them up to fight another day. Often, a tank in decent shape would get a new crew thrown in and sent straight back into battle until it got wrecked or broke down for good. The Soviets were no strangers to driving German tanks like the Panzer III, Panzer IV, Panthers, or even the fearsome Tigers. Meanwhile, the Germans happily climbed into captured Soviet KV tanks or the legendary T-34, especially the upgraded T-34-80-5 that rolled out late in the war. But the IS-2, named after Joseph Stalin himself, was a rare prize. Why? Let's break it down. The IS-2 was a masterpiece of Soviet engineering, a heavy tank built to dominate. From late 1943 to mid-1945, Soviet factories churned out just 3,395 of these beasts. Compare that to the tens of thousands of T-34s built, and you see the IS-2 was special, a tank designed not for mass production, but for delivering a knockout punch. Weighing 46 tons, the IS-2 was hefty but surprisingly light for a heavy tank. Its thick armor and smart battle tactics made it a tough target. Soviet commanders used it to spearhead assaults, always backed up by infantry and other tanks, which made capturing one a nightmare for the Germans. Even if an IS-2 took a hit, Soviet repair crews were quick to drag it off the battlefield. Add in its rock-solid reliability, and you can see why the Germans rarely got their hands on one in working order. The IS-2 hit the battlefield in March 1944, fighting for just over a year. By then, the war was turning, with the Soviets pushing hard in offensive operations. The Germans had little chance to snag a tank, even if they managed to knock one out. German tank ace Otto Carius once described finding a mostly intact IS-2, planning to ship it to Berlin for study, but the Soviet advance moved too fast for them to pull it off. Historians estimate the Germans captured no more than 10 IS-2s throughout the war, and most were too damaged to use. Those that were intact were usually sent to Germany for analysis, not thrown into combat. One famous photo shows a captured IS-2 with a German inscription on its turret. Not a unit marking, but a note saying it was headed to the Wehrmacht's high command. Yet, one wild story about the IS-2 stands out: the tale of German tank crewman Martin Horst. In January 1945, during the Vistula-Oder offensive, the German 16th Panzer Division was locked in brutal fighting in southern Poland. The Soviets were charging forward, and the Germans were scrambling to hold them back. In one village, a fierce tank battle erupted. The Germans managed to repel a Soviet attack, but their own losses were heavy. Martin Horst, a German tank crewman, saw his Panther tank get knocked out, leaving him and his crew without a ride. Then, amid the village's ruins, they stumbled across something incredible: an abandoned IS-2 in seemingly perfect condition. Why did the Soviet crew ditch it? That's a mystery. Maybe smoke filled the tank during the fight. and the crew mistook it for a fire, bailing out in a panic. Stories like this pop up in war memoirs, like Vladimir Pershinin's Penal Tanker, where crews sometimes abandoned tanks under stress, only to lose them. Whatever happened, Horst crew found a golden opportunity and climbed in to check it out. The moment the Germans crawled inside the IS-2, they were floored. Its shape reminded them of their own King Tiger, Germany's heaviest tank. Even Otto Carius wrote in his memoirs that his crew initially mistook an IS-2 for a captured King Tiger, only realizing their mistake when they spotted the Soviet-style tracks. The IS-2's massive 122mm D-25T gun was a showstopper. The Germans saw it as a match for the King Tiger's cannon. Carius noted one drawback. The IS-2 used separate loading for its shells and charges, which slowed its firing rate compared to German unitary rounds. Horst didn't mention this, maybe because the heat of battle overshadowed it. The crew was also surprised by the IS-2's electric turret drive. They'd expected a clunky manual system, common in earlier Soviet tanks, but the IS-2 setup let the turret spin even with the engine off, a big advantage over the Panther, where turret speed depended on engine power. Still, the tank's interior shocked them for another reason. It was cramped. Compared to the already tight Panther, the IS-2 felt like a sardine can. Soviet designers clearly prioritized armor and firepower over crew comfort, especially since the IS-2 was built for a four-man crew, while the Panther had five. Figuring out the controls was a breeze. The IS-2 had planetary steering, simpler than the Panther's complex hydraulic system. With about half the ammo left, roughly 15 rounds, the tank was ready for a fight. By the book, the Germans should have handed the IS-2 over to repair crews for shipment to the rear. But with Soviet tanks gearing up for another attack, every fighting vehicle counted. Horst and his crew decided to take a chance. An hour later, when Soviet T-34-85s rolled in, the IS-2 roared out to meet them. The surprise factor was huge. The Soviet tankers never expected one of their own tanks to open fire on them. Horst later claimed they knocked out 4 T-34-85s before the Soviets realized what was happening and returned fire. The IS-2 took a beating, with shells slamming into its armor. When the fight turned into a one-sided pounding, Horst's crew hid the tank behind a burning house and bailed out. Horst recalled seeing the tank's armor scarred with hit marks, the gun mask pierced, and a track barely hanging on. Miraculously, the crew escaped unharmed and made it back to their lines. They chose not to report the incident. Breaking protocol could have landed them in hot water, and trading a rare trophy like the IS-2 for 4 enemy tanks might not have impressed their commanders. The story only surfaced years later through Horst's grandson, Michael, an archaeologist who shared it with Soviet colleagues during a joint expedition. There's no hard proof it happened, and some dismiss it as a tall tale passed down in the family. But true or not, it's a gripping snapshot of the IS-2's fearsome reputation. German tankers had mixed feelings about the IS-2. General Friedrich von Mellenthin argued that the German Tiger outclassed it overall, calling the Tiger the best tank of the war. Otto Carius was more measured, saying the IS-2 was at least as good as the Tiger, but he'd rather face it in a King Tiger, which could hit it from a mile away. General Otto von Manschenfeld, however, was blown away. He called the IS-2 the world's best tank, praising its powerful gun, strong armor, low profile, and agility. In May 1944, he described his first encounter with the IS-2 as a shock. Our Tigers fired from 2 kilometers, scoring hits, but their 88mm shells couldn't penetrate until we closed to half that distance. We had to rely on mobility, tactics, and terrain to counter the Soviets' technical edge. The IS-2 wasn't just a tank. It was a symbol of Soviet resilience. Building it took a massive effort. During the war, the Soviet Union poured up to 60% of its budget into the military. With factories like the Chelyabinsk tractor plant running non-stop despite shortages of workers and materials. Germany, its economy stretched thin, focused on quality over quantity, producing fewer but highly engineered Tigers and Panthers. The IS-2's cost was steep, but it paid off on the battlefield and beyond. It paved the way for post-war Soviet tanks like the IS-3 and T-10, cementing the USSR's armored dominance in the Cold War. Historians now rank the IS-2 among the most balanced tanks of World War II, blending firepower, protection, and mobility. The tale of the captured IS-2 is more than a war story. It's about guts, quick thinking, and the raw power of a legendary machine. German tankers, backed into a corner, took a bold risk and turned the tables, if only for a moment. Soviet engineers built a tank so formidable it left enemies in awe, even when they stole it. This story reminds us how technology and human courage collide in war, creating moments that echo through history. Want more epic tales of tanks, battles, and the people behind them? Subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment below. Do you think Martin Horst's story is true, or just a family legend? What other World War II stories do you want to hear? Your feedback fuels our next big story.